Hey, I'm Amelia Mosley, and on today's BTN Special, we're looking at explorers and pioneers. Here's what's coming up. We find out what the epic flight was and why it's so important. And take a tour around James Cook's ship, the HMS Endeavour. But first up, more than 100 years ago, Douglas Mawson set off on an expedition that would write his name in the history books. Let's check it out.
On the 2nd of December 1911, Douglas Mawson set sail for Antarctica on what would become one of the most courageous expeditions in Australia's history. At the time, Antarctica had not been properly mapped. So, after visiting the continent once before with British explorer Ernest Shackleton, Mawson decided to lead his own expedition, the Australasian Antarctic Expedition, to map the coastal area of Antarctica closest to Australia. First, he set up a research base on Macquarie Island. That would give his team a line of communication between Australia and Antarctica. That in itself was a big first, because no one had sent wireless signals to and from Antarctica before. But it was just the start of Mawson's big achievements on this epic adventure. When Mawson and his crew finally arrived in Antarctica, they were met with winds of up to 240 kilometres an hour. That could literally blow you off your feet. In those winds, they somehow managed to build a hut to live and work in. And amazingly, it can be still found there today. Once that was done, Mawson decided it was time to hit the road. He headed out with Swiss scientist Dr. Xavier Mertz, Lieutenant Belgrave Ninnis, and a team of huskies to pull their sleds. Together they travelled 1,000 kilometres east, collecting geological samples and mapping their surroundings along the way. But the weather and terrain only got worse. The three explorers had to drag themselves and their supplies over crevasses and slippery rocks to keep exploring. Then, just a month into their journey, tragedy struck. Ninnis fell and disappeared down a deep crevasse, along with many of their supplies. Mawson and Mertz, realising they were in trouble, decided to head back to base. But soon they ran out of food. It got so bad the two men had to eat their huskies to survive. But what they didn't know at the time is that husky livers are poisonous to humans. So both became really sick, and Mertz died. Mawson carried on, sick and all by himself, battling the ice and snow, and nearly falling into a crevasse himself. But somehow he made it more than 160 kilometres to the safety of the hut. But there was still one last piece of bad news for Mawson to deal with. The ship back to Australia had just set sail that morning. So he was forced to stay on Antarctica with the small crew stationed there for a whole year, until it was safe to be taken home. A year later, Mawson arrived back in Australia and was knighted for his bravery and for helping everyone to understand Antarctica better. Today, Mawson's journals, filled with his many discoveries, are still being used by researchers hoping to learn more about this icy continent. And his epic adventure still remains one of the greatest survival stories in polar history.
Over 100 years ago, two Aussie brothers flew a plane from England to Australia. It was a huge deal at the time, and people still refer to it as the epic flight. Now let's meet some students who have been learning more about it. Take a look.
This is Rod Smith and his brother Keith. They're both from South Australia, and 100 years ago they did something amazing. It was called the Great Air Race, and we've been learning about it at school so that we can teach you.
Back in the early 1900s, flying wasn't even a thing. Planes hadn't even been invented. Lots of people were trying though, like the Wright brothers. Have you heard of them before? They created the world's first powered aircraft. Not too long after that, the World War broke out.
Planes were used a lot in the war, especially near the end. Pilots who were really good at fighting were called aces. Ross Smith was an ace.
Ross and Keith Smith grew up in South Australia and they were both pilots in the war.
At the end of the war, Australian Prime Minister Billy Hughes flew in a plane for the first time and couldn't believe how awesome it was. He thought this would inspire his country after the war, so he had an idea.
He said he'd give £10,000 to the first Aussie airman who could fly a plane from England all the way home to Australia in 30 days. In today's money, that's $750,000. Wow!
It was a dangerous challenge. Planes back then were pretty basic and unreliable. In fact, newspapers called it a circus that would end in death. But Ross was sure he knew of a plane to get the job done.
It was called a Vickers Vimy. This is the actual plane Ross and Keith flew from England to Australia. And this is David. He's a historian and he knows all about old planes.
These aircraft were designed as bombers. Basically, they're made out of wood and fabric covering the wings, and they have steel connecting plates and bolts and wires all the way through them to just keep the damn thing together.
Ross and Keith Smith weren't the only people on the plane. They had crew members to fix the plane. Their names were Jim Bennett and Wally Shears.
The pilot and the co-pilot, navigator, they sat in the front cockpit, and the two mechanics lay down in the fuselage at the back of the aircraft. Simple as that.
Once they had a plane and a crew, they were ready to go. They took off on the 12th of November with all their stops carefully mapped out.
At first it was easy going, but as it got closer to Australia, it got harder. Because a lot of places didn't have airports or runways, sometimes they landed in mountains or fields and attracted a lot of attention. Lots of these people had never seen a plane before, so everyone was really interested.
But while things were going well for Ross and Keith, the challenge ended in tragedy for other teams. Of the 5 other planes that entered, 4 crashed. In 2 of those crashes, the pilots were killed. While the 5th team made it to Darwin, the trip took 206 days. It took the Smith brothers 28 days, and they arrived on the 10th of December in Darwin.
It was so impressive that they were knighted. Now they're Sir Ross and Sir Keith.
When you think of the words of the American NASA director who said this flight was similar to putting the first person on the moon.
We've been doing projects on the Smiths. It's been really amazing to find out about these guys and their inspirational journey.
"250 years ago, Captain James Cook landed on the east coast of Australia for the first time. The ship that brought him here was the HMS Endeavour. Let's find out what it was like for those aboard on that long journey to the other side of the world. It was the year 1768. First Lieutenant James Cook and his men set sail aboard the HMS Endeavour.
At 2 p.m. we got under sail and put to sea, having on board 94 persons, near 18 months' provisions and stores of all kinds.
Their aim was to observe a rare event when the planet Venus moved across the sun, but they also had a secret mission to find the rumoured Great South Land and claim it for England. It was an epic 3-year journey that shaped our country's history. But the ship that made it possible sank years later, and its full wreckage has never been found. So in the 1980s, historians helped build this, a replica of the Endeavour in all its 18th century glory.
the ship itself is sailed exactly the same way, is exactly the same. So we still play the same game, if you like, as Cook and his men did so many years ago.
Now the ship's docked at port, so kids can hop aboard and explore what it would have been like to be on Cook's famous voyage. Above deck, the ship is just like it would have been more than 200 years ago, right down to the toilets.
This was their toilet paper. Okay, into the bucket of water, wipe their bottoms, basically, and that was it.
Wait, do they all share?
Down below, the ship is also decked out like the 1700s. From an old school oven to cannons, even the ship's cat. There was also another kind of cat that kept the crew in order, the dreaded cat o' nine tails.
If somebody is going to be punished for, say, disobeying an order that an officer gave them, they'd probably get 12 lashes with this cat across their bare back.
It'd probably be just pretty annoying because you'd have to follow everybody's rules, like the captain's rules, but you don't want to get whipped.
Something else that would have been tough on the crew was the food. So this is where the crew would have eaten all their meals, breakfast, lunch and dinner. Things like porridge, maybe a thin boiled soup with some meat in it, and even this, a biscuit called hardtack. Maybe not. The kitchen area doubled as another room too. This is where the crew would have slept. Pretty comfy really, not bad.
I just can't believe how many people could fit on this boat and how humid it is and really hot it would have been.
But for some crew members, things weren't so bad. And this would have been a luxury cabin, top class. It's a little small, but not bad. It's the kind of room the gentlemen on board like James Cook and botanist Joseph Banks would have had. And this is where Captain Cook would have spent most of his time, sitting right here on the original Endeavour, most of the time probably charting maps and eating his meals.
Yeah, I thought like everything was really cool, but I really liked like going into Captain Cook's cabin. I thought that was pretty cool.
I think it was great, like all the, like how it shows like what it was like how many ropes there were, how much they had to do.
So it seems James Cook and the Endeavour have inspired some of us to take the helm and sail the high seas on a voyage of discovery. Well, maybe one day. Well, that's it for now, but I hope you enjoyed learning about famous explorers and pioneers. For more info on all of our specials, including a huge range of teacher resources, just head to our website. See you next time. Bye.